Hi there and welcome back to my channel. This is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video we're discussing Sometimes I Lie, written by Alice Feeney. It's Alice Feeney's debut book, and it's the last book of all the books she has out at the moment that I've read. So I saved her first book for last. Not sure why, just the way it turned out. This book is good. It's a solid book, a good debut. I think it goes too far sometimes. There's too much in there, I think. But I think what's in there is done in a good way. The characters in this book are just like Alice Feeney characters in all her other books. You know, they're unlikable, some likable for some parts of the story, then some are unlikable in key parts as well, and some you'll change your mind on so many times in the book. The book itself is quite dark, goes to some very dark themes in the story, but I think there's too many of them. It's a bit over-egged, I think, the whole plot. I can understand why, though, that after reading this book, this debut book, many people became Alice Feeney fans. I can understand that, but for me, I think it just needed to be a little bit less. In this book, there are 3 narrative threads, 2 main ones and 1 minor thread. First off, we have the present timeline. The present timeline is with the main character Amber being in a coma in hospital. And it's all about what she hears and what she senses when she's in a coma. And it's almost like she senses more than you think somebody in a coma would. That's a bit strange the way that's portrayed in the book. I think it's done that way because if it was just about hearing things, well, how can you just write that in a story? It'd be very hard, I think. But I think there was a challenge that Alice Feeney tried to do in this book, and I think it's not that convincing. So for a debut book, I think she went a bit far with that element in the story. Then we have the past timeline. And the past timeline is about the last week or so leading up to the event that caused Amber to be in a coma. We don't know what that event was. We assume it's something big. You know, she's in a coma after all. We assume the event is big, but those few days, that week or so leading up to it, we have quite a few things going on, or many things actually. They're very twisty, very turny. You'll change your mind based on characters. Everything happens in that past storyline, influencing what you think about characters in the present. So they are consistent in what they're trying to tell you as a reader, but I think both timelines are a bit overdone. I think less is more in both those timelines to make it seem more real. Then the third narrative in this book, very minor narrative, but it's based on diary entries of one of the characters when they're a teenage girl. For me, I don't like diary entries used that way in a book. For one main reason, this is based on the diary of a teenage girl. It reads like the diary of someone who's an adult, and it doesn't read like a diary at all. It reads like prose, it reads like chapters in a book. It's just too detailed. The dialogue is too perfect. Everything in there is too perfect to be a diary entry of a teenage girl. I don't care how smart the teenage girl is. I don't care if they're a genius. The diary entries are too perfect for my liking. And that's one of the things that happens too often when authors include diary entries in books. They're too perfect. They don't feel real. I think it's a bit of a mistake to have diary entries in books most of the time. Not an element I enjoy very much at all. But of course, this book is focused on why is Amber in a coma? What caused her to be in a coma, and is somebody responsible? And most of the book is trying to work out who is responsible. And you'll change your mind on who is so many times. I guarantee you'll change your mind time and time again. It's written in that way. Alice Feeney knows how to write a twisty mystery. She knows how to make mysteries dark themed and dark feeling. Does that well. In this book, she does that. So for a debut, I think it's quite well done in those regards. But I think it is overdone. I think there's so much thrown at the reader in this story. So many terrible things happen to Amber in that lead up to her being in a coma. And even after she's in a coma, there are terrible things happening. There's so many of them. I mean, how many bad things can happen to one person in such a short time? It's just too many to be believable. So I think even though this is a good debut, even though there are great things in there, you know, great characters, great dark themes, great twists and turns, I think that just over-egging that whole the whole element of what goes on, what happens to Amber in that lead up and after the coma, just ruins part of the story for me. There are things in this book that are Alice Feeney staples. So we have multiple levels of subterfuge and doubt. Feeney does that in so many of her stories. We have great twists and turns. So many of her books have that as well. We have things that happen in this book that shift the whole book, that pivot just the direction of the story. And in this book, it happens at least once, maybe twice, but Alice Feeney does that in other books as well. And I think in later books in her catalogue that were written after this debut, I think that those things were done a bit more cleverly. I think they're still good in this book, but I think there's a heavy hand in there. I think she became more subtle in her delivery in later books. And that's to be expected, of course. I think a writer is probably going to improve as they write more books. So you can expect that debuts sometimes may be not that good. It just so happened that I think that subtlety wasn't there so much in this book. There are a few themes explored in this book. One theme is childhood trauma and how that impacts or influences your life as an adult. It's explored quite deeply in this story and explored from more than one character viewpoint. So I like the way that's done in this book. There's also themes of jealousy, possessiveness, greed, envy, all that sort of thing in this book. That goes on many characters, and I like the way it's handled. It is handled a bit overstrong sometimes in this book, but I think most of the time it's handled quite well. When I think of this book overall, because there's so much going on in this book, so many things thrown at the reader, it made me think like Alice Feeney was there trying to hurriedly put together a brick wall, slap together bricks and mortar to make a brick wall and cross her fingers and just hope that that wall holds. I think that wall's a bit shaky. I think, a strong enough push, that wall may collapse because there's just too much there. There's too much pressure in the story. But I also think for a debut, this book is very good. I think there are elements in there that are well done. There are good characters in this book. Those characters do feel real. There are good shifts in the story. There's a big major shift in the story that pivots the book to a different angle, and I like the way that's done. It's surprising. It makes you evaluate the characters in a different way and makes you think about everything about the book that you read so far in a different way. That's very powerful in the story, very cleverly done. And I think that in many debut books, it may not be done that well. So I think on that aspect, Alice Feeney's done a great job. But I think there's shaky ground with having too much thrown at the reader in one book. Amber is our narrative voice in the past and present timeline, and being the character in a coma as well in the present timeline. What I like about this character is her voice is consistent. It is quite dark and twisted in some respects, but there's other things going on with the character that make her very complex. She's vulnerable. She carries trauma with her. There's something with her she carries. There's a lot of anxiety with Amber, a lot of fear. She's a bit OCD as well. You get the impression that something's happened in her life that caused a lot of this in her adult life, and you're trying to find out why. But it's hard to get there because she's also unreliable as a narrator, a trope many thrillers have, but I think in this book it's handled quite well. I like Amber as a character overall. I like her complex construction. I like her viewpoint. I like how she expresses things in the book. I like that we can't trust what she tells us as well. It makes for an engaging read. Not a character trait that you like in people in real life. You don't want people in real life where you're wondering what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're doing is really them. And can you trust all the things they do and all the things they tell you? But in a book, in a thriller like this, that's dark and twisty, that makes an engaging character in my view. It draws you in more because you're wondering why. Those questions, those what-if questions, are important when you're trying to have this dark and twisty feel to a book. Claire is Amber's sister. Claire is very well written because straight away you have questions about her, those what-if questions. What if she was responsible for Amber's coma? What if Claire is not telling you the truth? What if Claire is doing this or that? You think certain things about Claire in the book straight away. You can't help it because it's the way it's written, because Amber's point of view voice is telling us certain things and feeling certain things in such a way that it makes the reader feel those things and think those things as well. So very well done in the book, because you're portraying the character in a certain way in the present timeline through Amber's point of view of being in a coma. It's very unusual to have other characters described to you through that lens. It was very unique, but handled quite well in the book. But also with Amber being in a coma and doing that, I mean, how much of that feels organic in the story? Does it feel too forced, too overdone? I think in some ways, yes, but I think because it's handled like that in the book and it's presented to us as a present timeline in the book, you can't help but be sucked into it and believe it. Paul's a character that I picture as a person covered in post-it notes with question marks drawn on them, because this character is all about what if questions. And you wonder about him through the whole story. Is he being truthful? Is he a nice person? What's he doing? What are his motives? You wonder about him through the whole story. A great use of character, because you suspect him, because he's a red herring, because he could be the person responsible for Amber being in a coma as well. You know, is Amber's own husband guilty of doing something terrible to his wife? All these questions go through your mind as a reader, and I'm not going to tell you what's true or not in the book, but I guarantee you'll wonder about Paul as you read this book. You'll wonder everything about him, because everything about him is just covered in question marks. This is a solid debut book, and I rate it a 3.5 out of 5. I think the main flaw in this story, despite me enjoying this book so much, the main flaw is it's overdone. There are too many things going on in this book, too many things happening to one person in such a short time. So I think for that reason, I can't rate it any higher. There are other debut books in the same genre that are better in my view because they're not as extreme. They don't have so many things going on for one character in a short time frame. I think in the case of this book, less would have been better. It's over-egged, it's overdone, and it takes away some of the realism of the story. On my channel, I review mini thrillers. If you enjoy thrillers, check out my channel and subscribe. On the screen now is a link to another video for a book I'm sure you'll enjoy.